okay? Is the finance sector doing enough? A little one to get you going.
Thank you, Ness. Sorry, I've just sat on the microphone. We're going to come back to that in a minute, because a couple of little reflections, and I might come back to you, Ness, in a minute, but a couple of little reflections just on Sarah and Rachel's presentation, great presentation earlier. Who felt that? Who actually sat there and thought, I'm feeling something listening to these two talk about what they are talking about? Because I certainly felt it. And what we want to do now, and I'll come to you in a minute, Nigel, what we want to do now just really is just to quickly get you to reflect on how are you feeling about everything that is going on in the world right now. Honestly, how are you really feeling? Because this is a conversation that we don't have enough of in business, and we certainly don't have enough of in finance. Nigel, how are you feeling?
Right, so I've got to say I'm not trying to look like a faded rock star, which I might well be, but the lights are so bright. I've had loads of stuff done on my eyes, so it's not that I don't want to see you, or kind of, anyway. What was the question?
How are you feeling, love?
Oh, right. I'm looking forward to going to the castle. I don't know about you lot. I'm surprised you're still here, really. It's amazing coming here, and the last time I was here, it was really interesting, and I think it's a great conference. The last time I was here was just before COVID, and I was speaking about the democratization of finance, which led us to launch the big exchange, and now what is really buzzing in my head is about the democratization of impact. How do we get and how do we ask people that being claimed we're impacting for, how we go this top-down product approach which says, hey, you down there, we're impacting you, you've got to feel great, and I got data on you. That doesn't wash. We have to ask people, how are you feeling? How are you impacted? Because if we don't do that, then it just becomes another 200, 300 years of cycle of not dismantling poverty. So for me, I'm absolutely obsessed right now with the democratization of impact. Ask people. That's how I feel right now.
That's how you feel right now. That's wonderful. I should actually add, Nigel and I have known each other for what, 15 years, 16 years?
Yeah, it feels like a lifetime.
It does feel like a lifetime. Believe me, it feels like a lifetime. No, we've known each other for about 15 or 16 years, having come across each other when I was actually at Bank of America. And you were still working your craft and your magic out in the marketplace. Nigel's been doing what he's been doing since the 1970s, and I'm sorry, mate, but this is going to make you feel really old. He's been doing it since I was born. So his entire life has... No, you weren't there. Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. But he spent his entire life in the pursuit of service to something bigger than himself. That sense of purpose and mission is very much, I think, infused in you. And the reason we wanted to talk a little bit about people and how you feel is because purposeful leaders feel their way as much as they find their way. They use equal amounts of IQ and EQ to cut through and to create the change. And Nigel is a phenomenal example of this. You can say thank you now.
No, so I was going to say I wouldn't go that far. And so are you.
Well, thank you.
You have broken those grounds from PwC to Microsoft to Bank of America to Founding Tribe. You know, you've done that as well. You've challenged. Actually, when somebody said, are you a professional? Have you been a professional for 10 years? I was going to put my hand, because I haven't been. I've been an amateur all my life. I'm doing it because I love it. And I don't think I'm probably fit to be employed by anybody anyway, so I don't think I can be. I was a professional full-colour litho printer, and which is my background.
But you are a professional, though. I mean, I'd challenge that, and I'd say, Nigel, you are a professional. You do it in a very different way, though. You're not signing up to any form of orthodoxy in terms of how you lead your businesses, how you work with others, how you think of a problem. You're not on this sort of matrix superhighway that I think a lot of us are encouraged to sign up to, in the belief that we're all Neo. You're not that person. You're off-road. You've spent the majority of your life off-road, in a Land Rover, literally just forging new pathways, thinking differently. What's that like, and how do you do it? How did you stumble across this? Is it part and parcel of who you are, or were you taught it?
I don't think you can teach it. Slightly sad now, if I may. My oldest friend, a guy called Jamie Reed, I was at his funeral on Friday in Liverpool. Jamie and I set up a subversive printing publishing press worked with other people in 1971 called Suburban Press. Jamie became very famous in the end because we were printing in the early 70s all the graphics that he did then for the Sex Pistols, the covers, the thing, and then a load more art. He was a community activist, a creativist, he was an artist. Both him and I loved William Blake and Tom Paine. And at his funeral, I said these things from Tom Paine, and we also talked about Blake. And the thing about Blake, about how you break those mind-forged manacles. Mm. And I think that's the key, is that we're not going to be trapped by what we think up here. We have to listen to other people, not to be trapped by those mind-forged manacles. And I think the other quote from Blake, which I love, is what is now proven was once imagined. And so I think it's that imagination and that, and it's difficult because I know, I don't know why, maybe it's bad wiring, same as John Bird, I don't know, that I feel confident, not always, but felt confident in challenging by imagining. And I think the trick around what we talked earlier is the imagining is easy for me, the execution is not. And so over those 50 years, I've worked with some extraordinary people that can have one step in the imagination and one step in the execution. And if those people weren't there, nothing would have happened. I'd still be imagining. And I'll get off and be a bit light in a minute. But at Jamie's funeral, I spoke. And something that Tom Paine wrote, which I think sums up what you just said. And the first line is so brilliant. The first line stands on its own. "'Tis the business of little minds to shrink." I mean, isn't that? I mean, if I just ended there, we could go, couldn't we? Anyway, "'Tis the business of little minds to shrink, but those whose hearts are firm, those whose conscience conducts their those whose conscience approves their conduct will pursue their principles until death." So I think it's about your mission and driving your mission, and that mission drives you, and then you say, right, how do I make that happen? And so that really is the thing, is I think don't chase the money, chase the mission. The money will follow the mission if you just go for it and you find the right people. And I think that's the key, is finding those people that can understand the gobbledygook that I sometimes speak.
So that's really...
I often speak, really.
So that's really interesting because, I mean, you said you can't teach it. We all have mission. Everybody has a sense of mission. And I think some people are very lucky because they understand what their, let's call it a calling. They understand what their calling is early in life and are able to chart a path to that. Other people can spend the majority of their life not actually really understanding what it is here that they are there to do. And as a result, they'll fall into professional careers and pathways that they're good at, but they're not necessarily emotionally engaged in. So I understand that you can't necessarily teach mission, but how do you teach the toolkits that enable people to find mission and therefore to take that mission, take that purpose into their organizations? Because I'd argue that, purpose leaders are in some way like explorers. They are going off track. They're going into areas that, the main system isn't looking at. And it's courage to do that, and it's a real sense of curiosity. So how do we get in the world's most regulated system that sense of courage and curiosity to encourage people to go off-piste?
I don't know, but What I think, and what's come out of, this is the global ethical, is that there are millions and millions of people who are leaders in their own right, and who are doing it not on a financial scale, in their communities, within their communities, when they're talking change, fighting for survival. Those are all leaders. I think and those are the most important people, because that is about movements. That is about movements of people that will make change. And I think perhaps the whole thing about you leading as a top-down is actually overrated, and you feel small with some of the stories that we heard today, and I heard last night about people in their communities outside, all over the world, who are doing things and making change and challenging. Those are the real leaders. Those are the real leaders.
Well, there's an expression: the best leaders lead from behind, as opposed to leading from the front. Talk to me about the rental exchange, because I want to tackle this issue around data, which has been coming through time and time again today. Obviously, technical standards and data is where a lot of, I think, the conversation today has really focused on. Talk to me about the rental exchange. Talk to me about the use of data. Talk to me about the right data.
Yeah, it's really odd, isn't it? Because everybody's saying, I can't do this, I can't prove this, because we haven't got the data. Well, that's because you've got the wrong data, or it's not, or we haven't got the data. It's not, and it just annoys me so much. We've developed, the Royal, it's the Royal We, my team, developed. So, and within our 4 funds, or that we're launching in the public markets, we've had the 3 C's, we've called it, and actually there's a 4th C now, right? And it's, how do you look at things through a lens? And we look at it through the company lens. What does that company do through that lens? And we're working on an inclusive growth, gender equality, and a healthy society. So what does that company do in its operational practice itself? What does it do for the community in terms of its products and services and supply chain? And the 3rd C was, how does it mitigate climate? And what I think is Rachel, is it? I'm dyslexic, so I think it was just talking about, that unequal effect of climate on people. Anyway, so, and actually the 4th C now, I think, is confirmation. How do you get that confirmation that you're doing? So if you haven't got the data, go to people and confirm you're doing something good. And look at data in a different way. It's really interesting. You look at what consumer brands are doing now, who live or die on the behavioural things of selling their goods. They talk about sustainability in a really different way than we do. We talk about sustainability, biodiversity, expecting people to understand. Sunak now has just reversed, U-turned, I think it's gone to 35. The real one that gets obviously the big issue is that thing they've lifted that restriction on landlords in terms of their what they've got to do with their energy and whatever, which means people are still living in really shit conditions with wet and rain and cold and damp and so on. But do you know what? He's appealing to people that because it's our fault in a way, because we've not explained in a way that people understand what we're talking about in many ways. Lots of people will understand because they live in a drought, or they or because there's not enough food, or because whatever that, or they can't fit. There's lots of people experience that, or from where I come in the middle of London, the amount of people I know with asthma. Right, but when we talk on that political stage, we don't express ourselves in a way that people understand. We don't talk about the stories. We talk about the data.
Well, we talk about a ton of carbon, and most people go, I have no idea what that means.
Do you know what? I shouldn't say. I won an award once, right? And I was sitting next to this person who was the thingy of, I can't remember, of the carbon something or other. And I said, what's a ton of carbon? Because he's talking about how many tons of carbon they've done. And the answer, he answered the question was, are we at sea level or what? And I thought, Jesus, I said, I want to know, is it a bus, is it a fridge, is it a matchbox? I don't understand it. Anyway, it's about a fridge, I think. Anyway, in London, right? I just want everybody to know, right? We've got football fields of fridges, being whatever. Yeah. You asked me a question, rental exchange.
Yes.
I think it's about how you look at data in different ways and what data you look at. So. And I think it's a bottom-up experience. Can I just say something about bottom-up and the pyramid?
Go for it.
I understand what people talk about the bottom of the pyramid, but because I'm visual, I kind of have this image where you turn the pyramid upside down and you squash it, because people that are at the bottom are the top of the pyramid, so squash that pyramid, just turn it upside down. Anyway, that's just...
rental exchange.
Rental exchange, thank you, Amy. And by the way, before I go on to the rental exchange, this was meant to be an interactive conference.
We've got a little bit in a minute. Rental exchange.
Yeah, so bottom up. One of my managers at the Big Issue, anyway, his dad died, and he and his sister, twin sister, went to his dad's flat. His dad had been homeless and alcoholic, and had sold the Big Issue, the guy, I can't say his name obviously, came back and said, my dad wouldn't have liked to have died like that. And I said, what do you mean? I mean, nobody wants to die, but what do you mean? He said, because there was nothing in his flat, because he couldn't get any credit, and he wouldn't go to the baseball bat lenders to get that credit, because he couldn't get credit. So we started to play around with that, and if you got your mortgage, there's a lot of kind of bankers here who actually, some have signed up to the rental exchange, which is a partnership with Experian. If you pay your mortgage on time over a period of time, you get a better credit score. If you pay your rent in social housing on time over a period of time, you don't get any uplift in your credit score, because people weren't looking at data in a way that we were looking at data. And actually, those people, they're good. And we raised potentially, I think it was 3.75 million people in the UK in social housing, because they're paying their rent on time and were good bets. But the traditional view from the credit rating agencies, they're not, because they don't own. Amy, what about you?
Well, I was going to say, that's a really good example of how we need to think about data differently. And it was certainly something, obviously, that Rachel was talking about as well, with regards to the intersectionality between gender and climate. But let's think about where we may not have any data, but we have stories, or we have qualitative. So quick straw poll, stick your hands up in the audience if you're married. Okay, keep your hands up. Stick your hands up in the audience if you're with a long-term partner, the love of your life. Okay.
You are a happy bunch.
Yeah. By the way, we're recording this.
I suggest you all put your hands up.
Yeah, all of you put your hands up. Okay. You're with them because you love them. I am assuming you are with them because you love them. How many of you pulled a spreadsheet together to work out how much you loved them before you either moved in with them or bought a house with them? And anyone who puts their hands up now, I suggest you don't. It's one of the biggest investments we make, our relationship with another individual. And it either can be an asset, or if really badly executed, a liability. But it is a huge investment that we make with no data. It's all qualitative. And it's something that we work through qualitative storytelling. There may be little points of data that we may choose to use, but generally speaking, you can't really measure the affection, the love that you have for your other half. The question is, should you? You're still making that decision based on really good information. It's just not data in the traditional sense. It doesn't invalidate the relationship, it doesn't invalidate the importance of the relationship, and it doesn't invalidate your decision. So some things aren't meant to be measured the way that we have been taught to measure them. So we have to be comfortable taking qualitative data and doing what we know is right. And I think that is where we are with finance at the moment, and with a lot of the decisions that need to be taken. We have to be comfortable with uncertainty. That's where I am.
Oh, that's where it's so interesting, because going back to that, the whole thing around the data and ESG and the social, which obviously we, at the big issue and the funds we do, we live or breathe that. But in the end, it's not social, it's people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we sometimes miss, and sometimes that's the thing. It's all about people. And I think sometimes there's an old kind of philosophical Kantian logic, which something becomes an end in its own right. And it's almost the E and the S and the G and the D has become an end in its own right. And it's about people. And if we start to ask people what it is that actually change lives, and it could be really simple things like, we were talking about anti-slavery. It could be about so many things, but ask people. It's not a kind of abstract S. It's all about people. Amy, how did you get to be where you are right now? But I mean, I know you're
sitting next to you.
Right, that was an unfortunate one, wasn't it?
That was an unfortunate one. Quite, I suppose, quite interestingly. So I've been in the space now for about 30 years. And I actually trained, I'm not a classically trained financier. In fact, I am not a trained financier. I have got a climate and a soil science degree, and then I did a postgraduate in environmental policy and law. And I came into the sustainability space way back in the late 90s, when things were really starting to develop some momentum around what we actually now understand sustainability to be. But I was taught at school about acid rain. I was taught about climate change. I went to a state comprehensive, had the most incredible geography teacher who was teaching us about the state of the world and saying, you need to understand this. And I think that just inspired a young girl to say, something needs to change. It became very clear to me later in my career, having been in-house with Microsoft and then with Bank of America, and it was actually in my time with Bank of America during the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, that the intermediation of wealth had played a massive part in disconnecting people from what it was that they cared about, but also stimulating finance to think about risk in a very, very solitary way, not understanding the sort of the multidimensionality of risk that we now understand it with all of the externalities embedded as internalities. And I thought, well, there's got to be something that we can do, because the climate science is clear, the social science is clear, even the economic science, and we can come back to that in a minute, is pretty clear. Why is nobody addressing this at the scale that it needs to? And also, it's a pretty binary conversation. If you believe that sustainable investing is the right way to invest, then you do it across everything. You don't do it across a partial percentage of your assets. You can't be half pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. So let's build something that's pregnant and only focuses on investing in well-run businesses that are genuinely delivering value to society, and that also reflect the values of our clients. So it was pretty simple in many ways. We also set it up as a B corporation, so that it was cradle to grave in terms of its outlook. We're 7 years old. We've had a fairly interesting 7 years. We've had COVID. We have the war in Ukraine. We've got cascading climate crisis. It's been interesting for small business, but we've grown through it. And that, to me, is just such a reassuring thing to know that with all of these issues that we are now facing, the clients out there, the wealth holders out there want this. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here, and we wouldn't have grown through probably what has been one of the most destabilizing periods in sort of, human history in recent times. So I suppose I'm sitting here, having been tutored and coached and mentored by you a lot, Nigel, listening the way that we all do to all the messages coming out. And this is a phenomenal community. These people, all of you, are here because you believe in what needs to happen. And I think we're here to try and, in many ways, just give you a little bit more insight, Nigel, far more than me, into what a purposeful mindset is and how you can equip yourselves to do more, given some of the structural challenges that still exist. So I want to come back to Vanessa's question about, is what we've heard today and everything that we know that's going on, is it enough, Nigel?
No. Otherwise, we wouldn't. If it was, we wouldn't be here. And so, it's a bit like with a big issue. I mean, the object of our business is to go out of business. So the object of us is not to be here. Can I come back to people?
Yes.
It's really interesting. I think that I had. This is a luxury because for those that have savings and bank accounts and pensions and whatever. But I had this big debate. I don't know, 15 years ago when all the impact management project and all the methodologies were coming out, because I said I think people missed the most important dimension of all when they had this kind of, the spectrum of capital and all that, and that was people. Because I think if one person moves their savings, it doesn't matter if it's £1 or whatever, or moves their pension or whatever, from something that takes no account of nothing into, I don't care if it's ethical, sustainable, impactful, if they move that is hearts and minds, as Tom Bain said. That is the hearts and minds of somebody saying, I'm making a decision that I'm going to take control of what I do with my money for this world and for my family and my community and so on. And that, for me, is the most important thing of all. So if one person does that, so for example, just before we were talking about meat and whatever, in my view, and also about public-private policy, in my view, for example, if we get government to incentivise reducing the price of a plant burger at McDonald's or Burger King by 50p, there are millions and millions and millions of people that will change their habits and their behaviour and the hearts and minds, the same way that unleaded petrol did and everything else. And I think we have to think about on that scale and think of it about people rather than I think it's about people.
I think it's about people and process, and I'm just very mindful of the time. And if we get back to that food, we've run out. If we get back to that food question, and I think if anyone here is familiar with the fantastic Donella Dana Meadows' work on systems change, you've got to think of all of those levers that you can pull, and then which ones are the most additive in terms of creating the scale of change. And everything's measured pretty much by EBITDA, and a little bit like GDP. It's a slightly flawed measure. It's a massively flawed measure. So what if we shift from EBITDA to something like EBESDA, so earnings before environmental, social, depreciation and amortization? We get the costs of business on the balance sheet. That's what we do. The real costs of effectively doing business on the balance sheet, which then comes through into the pricing. So for example, nutritious quality food grown within the boundaries that nature sets should become cheaper than that is not as well. So it's flipping the paradigm and saying, let's think about some of the structural levers that we have as well. I am very mindful of the time. We were not going to be taking questions because this was not necessarily sort of a Q&A type thing. Yes, Nigel. I
just want to thank, GEFI for and this conference, because we might have been doing this for God knows how many years, right? But every one of you, unfortunately, when you talk about leadership, we're all the pioneers in this room. And so it's about you, the pioneers, that are going to go out and make the changes. And I think having that's how I'd like to end what I'm going to say, because it's all about you, and the influence that this room has is enormous if we go out there and fight for change.
Absolutely, and I'll just add to that as well that there have been a couple of little comments made during the day about the system's broken. The system isn't broken, it was built like this. And we are now inhabiting that system. And as the late, great representative John Lewis in the US said, get yourself in good trouble, necessary trouble. He said, reclaim the soul of America. I'm going to ask you all to reclaim the soul of finance. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.